My name is Sophia Reed. I'm 26 years old, and I just discovered that my parents spent my entire $500,000 college fund on a luxury European cruise for 15 extended family members, then had the audacity to tell me I should be grateful they included my spirit in their healing journey, while I worked 3 jobs trying to scrape together money just to apply to medical school. What they didn't know was that my late aunt's will contained specific language about educational fraud, and their lavish vacation photos were about to become evidence in a lawsuit that would destroy their financial security the same way they had destroyed my dreams. I've spent the last 4 years working as a registered nurse at Houston Methodist Hospital, saving every possible penny while living in a tiny studio apartment and driving a 15-year-old Honda Civic, all because I believed my Aunt Margaret's $500,000 educational fund would allow me to attend medical school without the crushing debt that destroys so many aspiring doctors. This wasn't just money to me. It was my future, my calling, and my aunt's final gift to ensure I could achieve the dream we had discussed since I was 12 years old. Aunt Margaret had been a pioneering surgeon in the 1970s and 80s, one of the first women to establish a successful cardiac surgery practice in Texas. She had fought against discrimination, sexism, and institutional barriers that tried to prevent women from entering medicine, ultimately becoming one of the most respected surgeons in the Southwest. When she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer at age 68, she spent her final months ensuring that her legacy would live on through supporting my medical education. "Sophia," she told me during one of our last conversations in her hospital room, "education is the one investment that no one can ever take away from you. I'm leaving you money specifically for medical school because I know you have the intelligence, compassion, and determination to become the kind of doctor this world needs." The educational fund she established was substantial and carefully structured, with $350,000 from her estate, plus another $150,000 from the sale of her medical practice and equipment. The money was placed in a trust managed by my parents, Linda and Thomas Reed, with explicit instructions that the funds were to be used exclusively for my higher education expenses, tuition, books, living expenses during school, and any other costs related to my medical training. My parents had been the obvious choice as trustees because they were financially responsible, loved me deeply, and understood the importance of education in our family. My father, Thomas, was a successful insurance agent, while my mother, Linda, worked as a high school guidance counselor. They had always been supportive of my academic goals and had frequently expressed pride in my achievements and ambition to become a physician. For the past 8 years since Aunt Margaret's death, my parents had provided regular updates about the fund's growth and management, assuring me that the money was safely invested and performing well in conservative mutual funds and bonds. When I asked for specific account statements or details about the investments, they would provide general summaries that showed steady growth, with the fund reportedly reaching approximately $500,000 by the time I finished nursing school. "Don't worry about the financial details," my father would say whenever I asked to see actual account statements. "Your mother and I are handling everything professionally, and the money will be there when you need it for medical school. Focus on your nursing studies and maintaining the excellent grades that will get you into a top medical program." The trust and confidence I placed in my parents' management of the fund allowed me to pursue my nursing degree without the financial stress that affected many of my classmates. While others worked multiple jobs and accumulated student loans, I was able to focus on my studies, volunteer at free clinics, and gain the clinical experience that would strengthen my medical school applications. My plan was methodical and carefully structured. Complete my Bachelor of Science in Nursing with highest honors, work as an RN for 3 to 4 years to gain clinical experience and save additional money, then apply to medical school with the security of knowing that Aunt Margaret's fund would cover my educational expenses without forcing me into the massive debt that burdened so many physicians. The nursing program at University of Texas Health Science Center was rigorous and competitive, but I thrived in the challenging environment of clinical rotations, advanced coursework, and hands-on patient care. My professors consistently praised my clinical judgment, technical skills, and compassionate approach to patient care, often suggesting that I had the potential to become an exceptional physician. "Sophia," Dr. Jennifer Martinez, my clinical instructor, said during my final semester, You have the clinical instincts and intellectual curiosity that define the best doctors I've worked with. Medical school will be the perfect next step for someone with your capabilities and dedication. Have you ever felt like everything in your life was perfectly aligned toward achieving your greatest dream, only to discover that the foundation you'd built everything on was about to crumble? That's exactly where I was as I prepared to transition from nursing to medical school, completely unaware that the financial security I'd counted on for 8 years had been systematically destroyed by the people I trusted most. After graduating summa cum laude from nursing school, I spent the next 3 years working in the cardiac intensive care unit, gaining experience with the most critically ill patients while building relationships with physicians who could provide strong letters of recommendation for medical school. The work was demanding, but incredibly fulfilling, confirming my belief that medicine was my true calling, and that the years of preparation would be worth the eventual reward of becoming a doctor. During those 3 years, I lived as frugally as possible to save money for medical school application fees, MCAT preparation, and the various expenses associated with the application process. My studio apartment cost $800 per month. I bought groceries at discount stores, and I drove my aging Honda until it required more maintenance than it was worth. Every sacrifice felt meaningful, because I knew that Aunt Margaret's fund would allow me to attend medical school without the financial stress that forced many students to work during their studies. The medical school application process is extraordinarily expensive and time-consuming, with application fees, standardized test costs, interview travel expenses, and other requirements that can easily total $5,000, $8,000 before a student even begins classes. I had been saving meticulously for these costs while assuming that the major expenses, tuition, living expenses, and educational materials, would be covered by the trust fund my parents had been managing. 6 months ago, I began the formal process of applying to medical school, starting with requesting access to the educational fund to verify the exact amount available and plan my applications accordingly. I called my parents to schedule a meeting about transferring control of the fund and understanding the specific procedures for accessing the money for tuition payments. "Mom," I said during what I expected to be a routine financial planning conversation, "I need to start the process of accessing Aunt Margaret's educational fund for medical school. Can we meet this weekend to review the account statements and understand how to transfer the money when I start classes next fall?" The response was immediate and uncomfortable silence, followed by evasive answers that should have raised immediate red flags about the fund's status and availability. "Sophia, honey," my mother Linda said, her voice suddenly tense and defensive. "There are some complications with the fund that we need to discuss. The investments haven't performed as well as we had hoped, and there have been some management expenses that have affected the balance." The vague explanation about complications and management expenses was completely different from the positive reports they had been providing for years. Something was clearly wrong with the fund, but I assumed we were dealing with investment losses or administrative issues rather than anything more serious. "What kind of complications?" I asked, feeling the first stirrings of anxiety about my financial security for medical school. "How much money is actually available? I need to know the exact amount so I can plan my applications and understand what additional funding I might need." "We should talk about this in person," my father Thomas interjected, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "There are some details that would be better explained face-to-face rather than over the phone." The insistence on an in-person meeting to discuss what should have been straightforward financial information was ominous and concerning. In my experience as a nurse, I had learned that when people avoided giving direct answers about serious matters, it usually meant the news was much worse than they wanted to admit over the phone. I drove to my parents' house that weekend with a growing sense of dread, but I was still completely unprepared for the magnitude of the betrayal and theft I was about to discover. I assumed we would be discussing investment losses or fees that had reduced the fund's value, not the complete disappearance of my entire educational inheritance. The meeting took place in my parents' living room, where they had obviously prepared for a difficult conversation, but seemed to have no understanding of how devastating their news would be, or how completely it would destroy my trust in them and my plans for the future. "Sophia," my mother began, "we need to tell you about some decisions we made regarding the educational fund. There was a family situation that required us to use some of the money, and we thought you would understand and support our choice to help the family during a difficult time. The euphemistic language about using some of the money for a family situation was clearly designed to minimize whatever they had done. But I was already beginning to suspect that the reality was much worse than they were willing to admit directly. "How much money did you use?" I asked, dreading the answer but needing to understand the extent of the damage to my educational plans. "All of it," my father said quietly, apparently deciding that direct honesty was better than continuing to minimize the situation. "We used the entire fund to help the family heal after Uncle Jerry's death. We paid for a luxury cruise to Europe for 15 family members, so everyone could grieve together and support each other during the difficult time." The revelation that they had spent my entire $500,000 educational inheritance on a vacation for extended family members was so shocking that I initially couldn't process what they were telling me. They had destroyed my medical school plans, my financial security, and my ability to honor Aunt Margaret's wishes by funding a luxury cruise for people who had never contributed anything to my education or dreams. The conversation that followed would reveal the full extent of their betrayal and the callous attitude they had toward my educational goals and financial future. The silence that followed my father's admission that they had spent my entire educational inheritance on a family cruise was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I sat in their living room trying to process the magnitude of what they had just told me, while they waited for my response, as if they expected gratitude for their decision to destroy my medical school plans for the sake of a luxury vacation. "You spent $500,000 on a cruise?" I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper as I tried to understand how anyone could justify such a devastating betrayal of trust and responsibility. "It wasn't just a cruise," my mother Linda said defensively, as if the specific type of vacation made their theft more acceptable. "It was a healing journey for the entire family after Uncle Jerry's death. Everyone was grieving and needed time together to process their loss and support each other." The characterization of a luxury European cruise as a healing journey was so absurd and self-serving that I almost laughed, despite the devastation I was feeling. They had stolen my educational future, and were trying to frame it as a noble act of family compassion, rather than the selfish betrayal it actually was. "Uncle Jerry died 2 years ago," I said, pointing out the obvious flaw in their timeline and justification. "You're telling me that you just now decided the family needed to heal together, and the only way to accomplish that was by spending my entire college fund on a luxury vacation?" My father Thomas shifted uncomfortably as I exposed the weakness of their excuse. "The grief process takes time, Sophia. The family was still struggling with Jerry's loss, and we thought bringing everyone together for a meaningful trip would help everyone move forward." The explanation was becoming more elaborate and less convincing with each justification they offered. They were clearly making up reasons after the fact rather than acknowledging that they had simply chosen to spend my inheritance on something they wanted, rather than preserving it for its intended purpose. "Who went on this cruise?" I asked, dreading the answer, but needing to understand exactly who had benefited from the theft of my educational fund. "The whole family," Linda replied, apparently proud of the comprehensiveness of their vacation planning. "Your aunts, uncles, cousins, and their spouses. 15 people total, plus your father and me. It was wonderful to see everyone together and happy for the first time since Jerry's funeral. The revelation that 17 people had enjoyed a luxury vacation funded by my stolen educational inheritance was even more devastating than I had initially realized. They hadn't just made an impulsive decision to spend some of my money. They had planned and executed an elaborate theft that benefited an enormous group of people at the expense of my dreams and financial security. "How much did the cruise cost per person?" I asked, trying to understand the math behind their betrayal and the level of luxury they had enjoyed while destroying my future. "About $30,000 per couple," Thomas said, apparently unaware that this information made their theft even more outrageous. "We upgraded everyone to suites, arranged private dining experiences, and booked premium shore excursions in every port. We wanted it to be a trip everyone would remember forever." The casual mention of $30,000 per couple for a vacation funded with my stolen educational money was so infuriating that I had to resist the urge to scream. They had not only stolen my inheritance, but had used it to provide an incredibly expensive luxury experience for people who had never contributed anything to my education or success. Have you ever discovered that people you trusted had not only betrayed you, but had done so in the most expensive and elaborate way possible, while expecting you to be happy about their choices? That's exactly what I was experiencing as my parents revealed the details of how they had converted my medical school dreams into luxury vacation memories for 17 people who weren't even aware of the source of their good fortune. "Did you tell the family that the cruise was paid for with my college fund?" I asked, wondering if the beneficiaries of their theft at least understood what they were receiving and at whose expense they were enjoying themselves. "We told them it was a family gift to help everyone through the grieving process," Linda said, apparently proud of their generosity, while completely ignoring the fact that the gift had been stolen from me. Everyone was so grateful and touched by the gesture. It really brought the family together in ways we hadn't seen in years. The fact that they had presented themselves as generous benefactors while actually being thieves who had stolen from their own daughter was particularly infuriating. The extended family members who had enjoyed the luxury cruise had no idea that their vacation had been funded by destroying a young woman's educational dreams and future career prospects. "So you stole $500,000 from my medical school fund to pay for a luxury cruise, then took credit for being generous family members who cared about everyone's emotional healing," I summarized, making sure I understood the full scope of their betrayal and deception. "We didn't steal anything," Thomas protested, apparently genuinely believing that their actions were justified. "We made a difficult decision about how to use family resources during a time of crisis. The money helped 17 people heal from their grief and strengthen family bonds that had been damaged by Jerry's death." The claim that they hadn't stolen my inheritance was so disconnected from reality that I realized they had convinced themselves that their betrayal was actually a noble sacrifice. They had reframed the theft in their minds as a difficult but necessary decision that benefited the greater good, rather than acknowledging that they had destroyed my financial security for the sake of a vacation. "That money was specifically designated for my education," I said, trying to make them understand the legal and ethical problems with their decision. "Aunt Margaret left it to me for medical school, not for family cruises or grief counseling through luxury travel." "Sophia, you're young and smart," Linda said, dismissing my concerns with the same patronizing tone she had used when I was a child. "You can get student loans and scholarships to pay for medical school. The family needed this healing experience more than you needed that specific money for education." The suggestion that I should simply accept massive debt for medical school because my extended family needed a luxury cruise was so outrageous that I couldn't initially respond. They were treating my educational dreams as less important than vacation desires and expecting me to sacrifice my financial security so that other people could enjoy experiences they couldn't afford themselves. Student loans for medical school average $300,000 to $400,000, I explained, trying to help them understand the financial reality they were forcing me to face. "You've destroyed my ability to become a doctor without crushing debt that will affect my entire career and personal life." "You'll figure it out," Thomas said with the same casual dismissiveness they had shown throughout the conversation. "You've always been resourceful and hardworking. Medical school debt is just part of the process for most doctors." The complete lack of concern for the consequences of their theft was breathtaking. They had stolen my financial security and were now suggesting that the resulting hardship was just a normal part of medical education that I should accept without complaint. As I left my parents' house that day, I felt a combination of devastation and determination that I had never experienced before. They had destroyed my educational dreams, but they had also revealed their true character in ways that would motivate me to seek justice and accountability for their betrayal. What they didn't know was that Aunt Margaret had been far more careful in structuring the educational fund than they realized, and their theft was about to have legal consequences that would destroy their financial security the same way they had destroyed mine. The weeks following the discovery of my parents' theft were the most emotionally and financially challenging period of my life, as I struggled to process the betrayal while trying to salvage my medical school dreams through alternative funding sources. The reality of needing to secure $300,000, $400,000 in student loans was overwhelming, especially when I knew that money had already been set aside specifically for my education, before my parents decided to steal it for their family vacation. The most infuriating aspect of the situation was watching my extended family post photos and updates from their luxury European cruise on social media, completely unaware that their incredible vacation was being funded by the destruction of my educational future. Every image of premium dining experiences, luxury suite accommodations, and expensive shore excursions was a reminder that my medical school dreams were paying for other people's vacation memories. "Having the most amazing time in Barcelona," my cousin Jennifer posted, along with photos of the private balcony suite that had cost $8,000 for her and her husband. "So grateful for the family's generosity in making this healing journey possible after Uncle Jerry's death." The gratitude being expressed for my parents' generosity was particularly painful because it was based on lies and theft rather than legitimate family support. My cousins, aunts, and uncles were praising Linda and Thomas for their caring leadership during a difficult time, never suspecting that their vacation was being funded by stealing from a family member's educational inheritance. Meanwhile, I was working overtime shifts at the hospital, picking up weekend assignments, and taking on additional responsibilities to earn every possible dollar while researching medical school financing options that wouldn't destroy my financial future. The contrast between my family's luxury vacation and my desperate financial situation was stark and infuriating. The social media documentation of their cruise became particularly detailed and extensive, with family members posting daily updates about their experiences and expressing ongoing gratitude for the opportunity to travel together. The luxury accommodations, premium dining, and exclusive excursions were all documented in ways that would later prove invaluable for legal proceedings, though I didn't realize it at the time. "Last night in Rome," my Aunt Patricia posted, showing photos of their private dining experience at a Michelin-starred restaurant. "This trip has been exactly the healing experience our family needed." Linda and Thomas really understood what we all required to move forward after Jerry's death. Have you ever watched people celebrate experiences that were purchased with your stolen money while you struggled financially to pursue the dreams that money was supposed to fund? That's exactly what I endured for 3 weeks as my family enjoyed their luxury cruise while I worked double shifts trying to save money for medical school application fees alone. The financial impact of my parents' theft extended far beyond just the lost tuition money. Without the security of the educational fund, I had to completely restructure my medical school plans, research schools with more generous financial aid packages, and consider delaying my applications by a year to save additional money and strengthen my scholarship applications. More devastating was the realization that my parents' betrayal had destroyed not just my financial security, but also my ability to honor Aunt Margaret's memory and intentions. She had specifically established the fund to ensure that I could pursue medical education without the financial stress that prevented many capable students from becoming doctors. By stealing that money for a vacation, my parents had violated both her wishes and her trust in ways that felt like desecrating her legacy. But the most shocking discovery came when I began researching the legal framework surrounding educational trusts and fiduciary responsibility. During my attempts to understand whether my parents had committed crimes by stealing my inheritance, I decided to carefully review Aunt Margaret's will and the trust documents that had established the educational fund. What I found would change everything about my understanding of the situation and my options for seeking justice. The original trust documents were more detailed and legally sophisticated than I had realized, with specific language about the fund's purpose, the trustees' responsibilities, and the consequences of misusing the designated educational money. Aunt Margaret had clearly worked with experienced estate planning attorneys to ensure that her educational gift would be protected from exactly the kind of theft and misuse that my parents had committed. The educational fund established by this will is designated exclusively for Sophia Reed's higher education expenses, including but not limited to tuition, books, living expenses during school, and other costs directly related to her medical training, the trust document stated explicitly. The trustees are authorized to disburse funds only for legitimate educational expenses and are prohibited from using the money for any other purpose. The language was clear and unambiguous. My parents had been legally prohibited from using the educational fund for anything other than my education, which meant their luxury cruise expenditure was a direct violation of the trust terms and their fiduciary duties as trustees. But the most important discovery was the specific penalty clause that Aunt Margaret had included to deter exactly the kind of misuse that had occurred. Any trustee who uses educational fund money for unauthorized purposes shall be personally liable for complete restitution of the misused funds, plus interest and legal fees, and shall be subject to immediate removal from their trustee position. The penalty clause was comprehensive and devastating, making my parents personally responsible for repaying every penny they had stolen, plus interest and attorney fees. More importantly, it provided a clear legal foundation for recovering the money and holding them accountable for their betrayal. Armed with this legal documentation, I made the decision that would define the rest of my relationship with my family and determine whether my medical school dreams could be salvaged from the wreckage of their theft. I contacted the estate planning attorney who had helped Aunt Margaret create the trust, explained the situation, and asked about my options for recovering the stolen educational funds. His response was immediate and encouraging. My parents had committed multiple serious legal violations that would result in both civil and potentially criminal consequences. Sophia, Attorney David Williams explained during our initial consultation, your parents have committed breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of trust assets, and potentially fraud, depending on how they accessed and transferred the money. The penalty clause in your aunt's trust makes recovery almost certain, and the social media documentation of their cruise expenditures provides perfect evidence of how the stolen money was used. The legal case was stronger than I had dared to hope, with clear evidence of theft, explicit trust language prohibiting their actions, and comprehensive documentation of how they had spent my stolen inheritance on luxury vacation experiences for 17 people. But filing a lawsuit against my own parents would permanently destroy our family relationships and create consequences that would affect everyone involved for years to come. The decision required me to choose between preserving family harmony and recovering my educational future, between enabling their theft and seeking justice for their betrayal. The choice was actually easier than I had expected, because their actions had already destroyed my trust and respect for them in ways that made reconciliation impossible without accountability and restitution. 6 months after discovering the theft of my educational fund, I filed a comprehensive lawsuit against my parents for breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of trust assets, and violation of the specific terms of Aunt Margaret's educational trust. The legal action sought complete restitution of the $500,000 they had stolen, plus interest, attorney fees, and punitive damages for their betrayal of their legal and ethical obligations as trustees. The lawsuit immediately froze their assets and initiated a forensic accounting investigation that would trace every dollar of the stolen educational fund and identify all the luxury cruise expenses that had been paid for with my inheritance money. The social media documentation that my extended family had enthusiastically posted during their vacation became crucial evidence in proving exactly how my stolen money had been spent. The defendants systematically violated their fiduciary duties by converting $500,000 in educational trust funds to pay for personal luxury vacation expenses, my attorney's complaint stated. They used the plaintiff's medical school inheritance to fund premium cruise accommodations, dining, and excursions for 17 family members, while knowing that this expenditure directly violated the trust terms and destroyed the plaintiff's ability to pursue her educational goals. The legal language was formal and clinical, but it accurately captured the magnitude of my parents' betrayal and the devastating impact their theft had on my educational dreams and financial security. My parents' initial response was to claim that they had acted within their authority as trustees and that the family cruise had been a legitimate use of family resources during a time of grief and healing. Their defense was both legally weak and factually absurd, given the explicit language in the trust documents prohibiting exactly what they had done. Linda and Thomas Reed assert that their decision to use educational trust funds for family grief counseling through luxury travel was within their discretionary authority as trustees, their attorney's response claimed, apparently without understanding how ridiculous this argument sounded in a legal context. The defense strategy revealed that my parents still didn't understand the seriousness of their actions or the strength of the legal case against them. They were treating a clear case of trust fund theft as if it were a family disagreement about spending priorities rather than a violation of explicit legal obligations. But the most satisfying aspect of the legal proceedings was watching the forensic accounting investigation reveal the full extent of their luxury spending and the elaborate ways they had used my stolen inheritance to provide premium experiences for people who didn't deserve them and couldn't afford them independently. The forensic accountant's report was comprehensive and damaging, detailing exactly how the stolen educational fund had been converted into luxury cruise experiences. $85,000 for premium suite upgrades, $45,000 for specialty dining and private chef experiences, $38,000 for exclusive shore excursions and private tours, $25,000 for spa services and personal treatments, and $18,000 for premium beverage packages and wine tastings. Have you ever seen a detailed breakdown of how your stolen dreams were converted into other people's luxury experiences? That's exactly what I experienced reading the forensic accounting report that showed precisely how my medical school tuition had become someone else's vacation memories. The investigation also revealed that my parents had used additional credit and financing to supplement the stolen trust fund money, meaning they had spent even more than the $500,000 they had stolen from me. The total cost of their family healing cruise was approximately $650,000, with the additional $150,000 coming from credit cards and personal loans that they were now struggling to repay. As the legal case progressed through the court system, my parents began to understand the serious consequences they were facing and the likelihood that they would be required to make complete restitution, regardless of their financial ability to do so. The judge's preliminary rulings made it clear that the trust language was unambiguous and that their actions constituted clear violations of their fiduciary duties. The defendant's use of educational trust funds for luxury vacation expenses represents a textbook case of breach of fiduciary duty, Judge Patricia Morrison stated during a preliminary hearing. The trust documents explicitly prohibited such expenditures, and the defendants cannot claim ignorance of their legal obligations as trustees. The legal momentum was clearly in my favor, but the most important development was the court's decision to issue immediate orders protecting my educational future while the case proceeded to resolution. The court hereby orders the immediate garnishment of defendants' wages and seizure of available assets to establish an educational fund for the plaintiff, Judge Morrison ruled. The plaintiff's medical education cannot be delayed indefinitely, while the defendants contest their obvious liability for trust fund conversion. The court orders were swift and comprehensive, ensuring that my parents would begin paying for their theft immediately, rather than being allowed to delay accountability, while I struggled financially to pursue medical school. Within 60 days of filing the lawsuit, I had recovered enough money to begin the medical school application process, with confidence that my educational expenses would be covered through the court-ordered restitution from my parents' assets and garnished wages. The legal victory was satisfying and necessary, but it also marked the permanent end of my relationship with parents who had chosen to steal my dreams, rather than respect their legal and ethical obligations as trustees of my educational future. The resolution of my lawsuit against my parents was swift and comprehensive, resulting in a complete legal victory that not only recovered my stolen educational fund, but also established important precedents about trustee accountability and the protection of educational inheritances. The court's final judgment was everything I had hoped for and more than my parents had apparently expected when they made their decision to steal from my medical school fund. The court finds that defendants Linda Reed and Thomas Reed systematically violated their fiduciary duties as trustees, converted educational trust funds for unauthorized personal use, and caused substantial damages to the plaintiff's educational prospects, Judge Morrison wrote in her final ruling. The defendants are hereby ordered to make complete restitution of $500,000 plus interest, attorney fees, and punitive damages totaling $675,000. The judgment amount exceeded even my attorney's expectations, with the judge adding punitive damages to reflect the egregious nature of my parents' betrayal and to deter similar theft by other trustees who might think they could misuse educational funds without serious consequences. But more important than the monetary award was the court's establishment of ongoing oversight to ensure that my parents couldn't avoid their restitution obligations through bankruptcy or asset hiding. The judgment included wage garnishment orders, asset seizure authority, and monthly payment requirements that would continue until every penny of the stolen money was recovered with interest. The defendant's wages shall be garnished at the maximum legal rate until full restitution is achieved, the court ordered. Additionally, All non-exempt assets, including real estate, vehicles, and investment accounts, shall be subject to immediate seizure and liquidation to satisfy the judgment. And the comprehensive nature of the court's orders meant that my parents would face years of financial hardship as they repaid the money they had stolen from my educational future, while I would be able to attend medical school with complete financial security restored. The impact on my parents' lifestyle was immediate and dramatic, as their comfortable middle-class existence was replaced by the financial stress and uncertainty they had created for me through their theft. They were forced to sell their house, downsize their living situation, and accept that the majority of their income would go toward repaying their debt to me rather than funding their own comfort and desires. Sophia, my mother called me after the final judgment was entered. We never intended for things to go this far. We thought you would understand that family sometimes has to make difficult decisions, and we hoped you would appreciate that we were trying to help everyone heal from Jerry's death. The attempt to characterize their theft as a difficult decision made for family healing was still frustrating, but I was no longer interested in their justifications or their belated recognition of the consequences they were facing. "Mom," I replied, "you stole $500,000 from my medical school fund to pay for a luxury cruise. You violated your legal obligations as trustees, betrayed Aunt Margaret's wishes, and destroyed my educational plans for the sake of a vacation. Now you're facing the consequences of those choices." Meanwhile, the extended family members who had enjoyed the luxury cruise, funded by my stolen inheritance, were beginning to understand the source of their vacation and the impact their good fortune had on my educational dreams. Several reached out to express shock, embarrassment, and offers to contribute toward repaying the money that had been stolen to fund their experiences. "Sophia," my cousin Jennifer called, after learning the truth about the cruise funding. "I had no idea that our vacation was paid for with your college money. I'm horrified that we enjoyed ourselves while your educational future was being destroyed. I want to contribute whatever I can toward making this right. Have you ever received apologies from people who had unknowingly benefited from crimes committed against you?" That's exactly what I experienced as my extended family learned the truth about the luxury cruise and their role as unwitting beneficiaries of my parents' theft. The offers of restitution from family members who had enjoyed the cruise were meaningful but unnecessary, since the court's judgment against my parents was comprehensive and enforceable. More important was their recognition that my parents' actions had been wrong, and their support for my pursuit of justice and accountability. But the most satisfying aspect of the legal resolution was starting medical school at Baylor College of Medicine, with complete financial security and the knowledge that justice had been served for my parents' betrayal. The educational fund that Aunt Margaret had established to support my dreams was finally being used for its intended purpose, despite my parents' attempts to steal it for their own desires. My first day of medical school was both triumphant and bittersweet, representing the achievement of dreams that had nearly been destroyed by family members who should have been supporting my success rather than exploiting it for their own gratification. "Welcome to medical school," Dr. Sarah Chen, the Dean of Students, said during orientation. "You're beginning a journey that will challenge you intellectually, emotionally, and professionally in ways you can't yet imagine. But you're also joining a profession dedicated to healing, service, and making the world a better place through medical knowledge and compassionate care." The words resonated deeply because they captured exactly why Aunt Margaret had established the educational fund and why my parents' theft had been so devastating beyond just the financial impact. They had tried to steal not just money, but my ability to serve others through medicine and to honor her legacy of healing and professional achievement. As I settled into the rigorous academic schedule of medical school coursework, clinical rotations, and research opportunities, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from the devastating discovery of my parents' theft to the triumphant recovery of my educational dreams through legal action. The lawsuit had been about more than just recovering stolen money. It had been about establishing that educational investments are sacred trusts that deserve protection from people who would exploit them for personal gratification. It had been about honoring Aunt Margaret's memory and ensuring that her gift would achieve its intended purpose despite my parents' betrayal. But most importantly, it had been about learning that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to hold them accountable for their actions, even when that accountability creates conflict and consequences that permanently change your relationships. My parents continued to make their court-ordered restitution payments throughout my medical school years, serving as a constant reminder that actions have consequences and that betraying trust results in long-term accountability rather than temporary inconvenience. The extended family relationships affected by the revelation of the cruise funding gradually healed as people understood the truth about what had happened and supported my pursuit of justice rather than enabling my parents' theft. Several family members became strong advocates for educational protection and trustee accountability based on witnessing the impact of my parents' betrayal. 4 years later, as I prepared to graduate from medical school and begin my residency in cardiothoracic surgery, the same specialty Aunt Margaret had pioneered, I felt profound gratitude for the legal system that had protected my educational dreams and the extended family members who had supported my pursuit of justice. Dr. Reed, my surgery residency director, said during our final interview, "Your academic performance, clinical skills, and professional dedication suggest that you'll become exactly the kind of surgeon this field needs. Your aunt would be proud of what you've accomplished." The recognition of my achievements and the connection to Aunt Margaret's legacy was deeply meaningful, representing the successful completion of a journey that had nearly been destroyed by theft and betrayal, but had ultimately been salvaged through legal action and personal determination. As I reflected on the experience of having my educational dreams stolen and then recovered through the justice system, I realized that the most important lesson wasn't about money or family relationships, but about the sacred nature of investing in someone's potential and the obligation to protect those investments from people who would exploit them. If you're reading this and you're dealing with family members who have misused educational funds, inheritance money, or other resources designated for your future, please know that you have legal rights and options for recovery that go beyond family discussions and emotional appeals. Educational trusts and inheritance funds are protected by law specifically because they represent other people's investment in your potential and their belief in your ability to achieve important goals. When family members violate those trusts, they're not just taking money, they're stealing dreams, opportunities, and the legacy of people who cared about your success. Setting boundaries with family members who exploit your resources isn't cruel. It's necessary for protecting your future and honoring the people who invested in your potential. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can do for someone's memory is to ensure their gifts achieve their intended purpose, rather than being diverted to benefit people who didn't earn them. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share your experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had family members misuse money that was designated for your education or future? How did you handle situations where relatives felt entitled to resources that were meant to support your goals? Your story might help someone else who's struggling with similar challenges and doesn't realize they have legal options for protection and recovery. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember that your educational dreams are worth protecting through whatever legal means necessary. See you in our next story here on Her Sweet Revenge.